Hello and welcome to the Blood Reds Morning Bulletin. I'm joined by Andrew Beasley, and today we're going to be talking about Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain's future at Liverpool. Obviously, on Tuesday night, Jurgen Klopp made 9 changes, but that still wasn't enough for Oxlade-Chamberlain to feature against Southampton. Andrew, where do you see his future? Were you surprised not to see him feature in that game?
Yes and no. He seemed quite an obvious choice to play because of how little he's featured recently. But you could also then argue, well, if he hasn't been featuring, then why should he play? Really, he hasn't started a game for quite some time. His last appearance was the FA Cup quarter-final against Notts Forest. Prior to that, it was the FA Cup game against Norwich. So he's clearly sort of fallen down the pecking order. I mean, since the Forest game, he hasn't even been in the squad that often. I mean, he was on the bench for Southampton, but that was only the 6th time since that Forest game. You know, there's been plenty of games there where he's not even been in the squad. So you'd have to assume from that his days at the club are over. Obviously, players like Jones and Elliot are a much stronger long-term bet for the Liverpool midfield. So whilst it was a very important game, you can understand why Klopp wanted to see how those guys would get on and how they'd play, because obviously they've not featured that much lately either. It's not like they've been playing every game by any stretch. I don't think Elliot had played since the Forest game either. But clearly, you know, Klopp has more faith in them for the future. So yeah, it would appear certainly that Chamberlain's time at the club is probably over. He's only got a year left on his contract anyway, so this summer would be the last chance they could get any sort of feedback for him. I don't imagine it would be a lot, but yeah, I can easily see them moving him on this summer.
I suppose the only sort of question mark I'd raise is he did very well on the right wing when Salah was away at the African Cup of Nations, and I think it was a surprise to see Minamino, who I think his last start was against Nottingham Forest as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was to see Minamino start on the right instead. Obviously, it was a decision that paid dividends for Jurgen Klopp in the end, but I think that is kind of a big identifier of where he's at, where his Liverpool career is at, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, and in fairness, when he did play on the right when Salah was away, he scored a couple of goals. It's not like he was ineffectual there, because his last goal was in the win at Crystal Palace, which was the second to last league game he started. After that, he played against Norwich at Anfield, a game I was actually at, and he didn't do very well, and the crowd were on his back and stuff like that. And I'm sure Klopp's not one to be influenced by, you know, sort of crowd reaction to a player necessarily, but he didn't have a good day. So whether that sort of made his mind up that he wasn't going to feature too often going forward after that. But no, I mean, you're right. He did do a decent job in the right forward position while Salah was away. But the thing is, you know, the competition for places now. I mean, Minamino's only made 9 starts this season and he's got 10 goals. So you certainly can't say that Klopp was sort of wrong to play him then. As you say, he scored against Southampton as well. So whilst Oxlade-Chamberlain is an option there, you know, I can easily see the club preferring to keep Minamino of the two, even if he doesn't cover quite as many positions as Oxlade-Chamberlain might.
Yeah, that's the thing with Chamberlain. It feels like he's very much the last of the options, whether we're talking about the attack or the midfield. He can play anywhere, but it just feels like he is one of those last options for Liverpool. And like you say, I think he's while he is versatile, I feel like he's never really found his place in the team at Liverpool. He's had good games in midfield. He's had good games on the wing. He says he wants to be a midfielder, but at the same time, I feel like he can be better on the wing. So it's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he was brilliant in the second half of 2017-18 before he got his injury, and then obviously missed basically the whole of the next season. And obviously Liverpool's sort of style sort of evolved a bit from then. It sort of changed to a different style of play where obviously relying more on the fullbacks and things like that, and less from sort of creativity and things from the middle. So obviously by the time he came back, the team had sort of moved on without him a little bit, which is unfortunate for any player. You saw a similar-ish sort of thing with Lallana, whereby the team sort of evolved and he was sort of a leftover guy from the early days of Klopp's reign, but he didn't fit quite so well into the sort of later team. And I think with Oxlade-Chamberlain, you forget that I was looking yesterday for something else, but he played a lot more in 29-20 than you sort of automatically remember. He played quite a lot of games that season, and I'm pretty sure he was top scorer behind the front three. He had the most goals that season. So, I mean, as recently as that, he was still a pretty integral part of the team. But obviously then Kate has sort of come in and probably gone past him. Thiago obviously has. And then as we sort of said earlier, you've got these younger lads coming through who are, going to be, you would imagine, part of the Liverpool team for the next 5 years, 10 years, however long. And obviously Oxlade-Chamberlain doesn't have that anymore. So he's been very unlucky because he was brilliant when he first joined the club, or, once he'd settled in that second half of 17-18. But, things move on. And unfortunately, I think he's been left behind a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely remember some of his goals in the 2018-19 season, because whenever he leaves Liverpool, there's going to be a big and very good compilation of goals that will be viewed on YouTube for sure. I think there was 2 against Genk and 1 against Arsenal during that season that were easy on the eye for sure. Now, it does feel like it is kind of the time for him to move on this summer. It feels perfect in terms of he still has 1 year left on his contract, so Liverpool can recoup some of the money. It won't be the 35 million that they sold him for. And like you said, at the same time, Liverpool are building for the future. Do you think Liverpool will need to replace him this summer, or do you think there's enough in the squad with Elliot and Jones and Cavallo coming in that there's not necessarily a need for Liverpool to go out and buy someone else?
I don't think there's a massive need. Obviously, what we have seen, and I think there was an interesting article on .com, was it yesterday or this week, about Liverpool's injury prevention. And I think going into this season, when Wijnaldum left, a lot of fans were sort of worried that they didn't have enough midfielders, and it is always a risk. But I don't think they sort of desperately need to replace him. As you say, it looks like Carvalho's coming in as well. They've got the younger lads. You would imagine Milner signs another 1 year deal. So I don't think they desperately need to replace him. I suppose it all depends where else they want to spend their money. I mean, they don't tend to spend too much each summer. Do they think the money is better spent elsewhere? I mean, they're in a fabulous position with the squad whereby, they're not sort of desperate for players in any particular area of the pitch. You could make a case for a backup right back to cover for Trent and things like this. If Nico Williams leaves, perhaps he goes to Fulham and things like that. But I mean, it's hardly a desperate situation. Gomez can play there and has generally been doing pretty well. He'll never be Trent, but he's doing okay. So, I suppose it depends which way you look at it. Maybe midfield is where they'll spend their money because they don't need players in sort of many other positions. But I don't think if he were to leave that replacing him directly would be a priority.
Absolutely. I did see an interesting rumour, which I was going to mention, about a potential swap deal between Liverpool and West Ham, and Liverpool paying money and Oxlade-Chamberlain to get Jared Bowen. I think it was reported by the Mirror. Do you think that's a feasible possibility? Is there something in that?
I mean, who knows with these transfer stories, obviously, and swap deals get mentioned so often in sort of rumours and rarely happen, albeit this one would be a sort of swap plus money. I mean, it seems plausible. You can imagine him going back to London, because obviously he was at Arsenal for a long time. Obviously, it seems that Liverpool are interested in Bowen. You could easily see Oxlade-Chamberlain doing a good job for West Ham. So while it's not a deal I would automatically assume was going to happen, it's not implausible that something along those lines could happen. I mean, I think, he may not be a regular for Liverpool anymore, but he's certainly good enough to play for that sort of next tier down of teams in the Premier League. If not the big 6 clubs, although I think he could do a job for some of them, but if not those clubs, then certainly the ones below that, West Ham or Leicester or somebody like that. So, yeah, I wouldn't put my house on it, but it's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility that we could see that one.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see where he goes, because I can see him having a real sort of Jesse Lingard trajectory when he left Man United, and if he is to go to West Ham, potentially I can see him being similar there. But I think that about wraps it up for the stream today. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks Andrew for joining me, and make sure to check out the rest of the Blood Red content going out today and all the written content on Liverpool.com. Thank you.